creation of transparent universities through the power of leadership is our next discussion panel. Please give your full attention to our respective panelists. We have Dr. Laura Dowling. She has 25 years of corporate operations management experience and 15 years of experience in curriculum and course design, and adjunct teaching experience in educational leadership, management, business administration, healthcare administration, and leadership at the doctorate, master's, and bachelor's levels. Dr. Bruce Mack, the Associate Vice President of Teaching and Learning at Chadron State College. Dr. Michael Leslie, Professor and Global Leadership Trainer and Developer. Dr. Rita Kakakti Shah, Founder and CEO UMA, a multi-award-winning career strategist, advisor to Fortune 500 companies, author, and TV show host. And Connor Watson, who's experienced in student governance and student involvement in higher education. Dr. Laura, take it from here.
Hi, everyone. We're here at the WHERS UNIRANKS Summit. Our topic of discussion is the creation of transparent universities through the power of leadership. The primary purpose of a university education is to acquire the skills necessary and knowledge for a chosen career and become fully prepared for the real world of work. Universities are failing to deliver at great financial burden to the student consumer and increasing dissatisfaction of industry employers who claim that graduates lack the basic skills necessary in multiple areas: critical thinking and problem solving, self-management, leadership, resilience and stress tolerance, interpersonal skills, intercultural and diversity fluency, and communicating effectively verbally and in writing. Simply put, the higher education business model, and in many instances, pedagogy for a social networked economy, is outdated and not delivering value to the student or industry consumers. The recent pandemic highlighted the antiquated models, resulting in disruption in higher education. Higher education faces intense competition from massive open online courses, such as Udemy, Coursera, edX, etc., who deliver unlimited and open access for a geographically dispersed and diverse participants via the web. Some key features include interactive experiences and community interactions among students, professors, and guest lecturers from industry via social media platforms with rapid assessment and feedback. High quality education is being delivered at a fraction of the cost of a traditional university degree. Many of these programs are accredited. We've seen top-tier universities such as MIT and Yale partnering with massive open online course companies to offer certifications. Education innovation like these are transforming the higher education space. To transform higher education to meet demand will require stakeholder collaboration and transparent leadership. Transparent leadership means leading with openness and honesty. Transparent leaders keep stakeholders in the loop, share information freely, and nurture open communications. In the university setting, stakeholders are many and include individuals and groups with an interest or concern in education at the university. The scope of these stakeholders is wide and includes university leadership and administration, students, parents, alumni, donors, accrediting agencies, government, and many more. Holding universities accountable for their ability to deliver value by ranking universities on how well they are delivering value is the obvious first step in transparency. To do this, we need innovation on how we rank universities. If I could at this point turn it over to my learned colleagues for some perspective and opinion. I'm just going to go around the Zoom room. Bruce, you're first. Please share some feedback or provide some commentary.
Good morning, and I appreciate this opportunity to speak. I study this on a daily basis, and I have to say I would like to speak to several things. One, we need to be more student ready than students are perhaps college ready or ready for higher education. Meeting students where they're at, making certain that we have first-year seminar experience programs, making certain that we're teaching our students how to college, teaching them the unspoken curriculum, perhaps even what office hours are or where the financial aid office is. We also have to be aware that we're dealing with a new group of students these days worldwide. We're seeing a different demographic, and we need to be prepared for them and their needs as well, with areas of diversity and intersectionality and identity. So we need to make sure that we are ready as leaders, as faculty, and as staff to meet our students and to welcome them into our institutions. Students have to take a chance on us before they know whether or not that they belong here. They're financially obligating themselves, or they're making life choices that obligate themselves in ways that we can't even imagine in order to join in the psychological contract and the social contract of higher education. I would like to say something about leadership here for a moment, and I would like to say that leadership needs to hold everybody accountable, including itself, for key performance indicators and outcomes and objectives for our higher education. Otherwise, the promise of higher education is not realized, and people will leave without a credential, and they'll leave without qualification, and many times they struggle to get back and complete that sort of education. How do we hold people accountable? Well, we have mission, visions, and values. We have objectives and outcomes, and we have our even just our job descriptions. Leaders need to hold themselves accountable, and then they need to hold those that they're responsible for accountable to make certain that a student who is recruited, who is admitted, who is counseled on which classes to take, who enters a classroom for teaching and learning, who must be mentored so that there is connection, and there is rapport, and there is persistence, and there is retention, and there is completion. And we have to really think to ourselves that we have to dedicate ourselves to 100%, a 100% completion rate. We may not get there, but if we're dedicated to a 100% completion rate, and we understand what it takes systematically or systemically in order to make that happen, why we will raise our graduation rates. We will then, of course, be favored with better rankings at our institutions, and will serve the purpose of higher education for our students' success and their sustainability.
Excellent, Bruce. I love everything that you said, and you're really focusing on that student journey, right? From where do I go? What's my best fit throughout the college experience? And currently, we don't have any tools that really do a good job at providing visibility on which universities do better and which universities don't do so well. Very powerful stuff. Rita.
Hi, thank you so much for this forum and for having me here. So just to give you a little bit of background, so I studied myself at King's College London, and I now serve on the Advisory Council of King's Business School. And other than my work I do, which is running a platform for empowering women and minorities, I do a lot of work with universities. One thing that I found is with that disconnect that we're talking about today, about student readiness and the outside world, is if I think about it from a student's perspective, I spend a lot of time with the student clubs, for example. So you have the student experience that they learn, what they get examined on, what they submit coursework on. And each of us in this room today unless you have a career in academia, which is maybe a little bit redundant for today, but generally the audience watching today, if you think about what you learned as a student, as an undergraduate, as a postgraduate, and the relevance of that to whatever role you do later on, you know, whether it's in the corporate world, whether it's in the nonprofit world, if it's policymaking, think of that relevance. Most people, if you actually do like a post-graduation survey, was actually, there wasn't that much relevance. There was something completely different. So things like that is about how can we make people actually ready for the real world out there. We don't know what direction people's careers take. Even the word career is redundant in a way, because when we all studied, a career was something you did for life. In my parents' generation, it's still very much the case. You retired with that career that you graduated with. I studied in the UK. You choose what you're studying at university at the age of 16, and then that sticks with you. I now live in the US, I'm in New York, and then you major in something and you can flip and flop. So I'm really like, wow, this is actually great. But there are, you know, institutions around the world and students come across from all over the world where you don't always get this facet. So you think about the differences in that, where the country they come from, and the fact that career in itself, you're preparing them for a career, but you're not. Because remember, this day and age, people do change things. Staying in a job for 18 months is, wow, that's actually pretty good these days. You know, it's totally fine now to even have a resume that has different facets, as long as you're passionate and you show something and you're going to make change later on. So even the courses on resume preparedness, like career strategy, I would always question that as well, and the relevance to later on. I would also take advantage more on these clubs that the students have, because most academic institutions have these clubs, because that is actually very relevant, where you get outside speakers, you get role models, former alumna and alumni coming in to chat about their journeys, really focus on that journey as well and figure out the practicalities, you know, put more role playing in to create that sort of bridge where there is currently a disconnect there.
Yeah, excellent stuff. And we do have a session on the gap between higher ed and corporate. And for me, I've had one leg in corporate for 25 years and the other leg in curriculum, course design, and adjunct instruction. There's a definite gap. What I see, the skills that I mentioned early on, if you look at those skills for which we have a gap are necessary elementary skills for any degree. And that would ready students in any discipline for the real world of work. And on the university side, we're just not delivering. And I love that you said, you talked about career, which was another session that we talked about, the failure to help students first job out and journey through their career in this rapidly changing, where the average tenure at a job is 2 years. Rita, you're so right. It's not 20, 25 years at the same company. It's a totally transformed environment. Got to do a better job with those. Connor, now, and Connor's interesting because Connor is a current student. And we invited Connor to get his perspective on this. And then we have Dr. Leslie. Connor.
Yeah, absolutely. Hi, everybody. Again, thank you for letting me join today. Everything that's been said is spot on. And, you know, when we're talking about stakeholders in university, the fact of the matter is students are the most important stakeholder. Without students, there is no university. There is nothing happening. There is no reason for that building or that campus to exist without students being there. And in the year of 2022, as Dr. Lara had mentioned, with the height of this pandemic, the antiquated models of higher education have really been shown. The skeletons have been shown out from the closet, and it's become more prevalent that students need to have voices in the universities. They need to have direct say in what's happening at their university. We're just talking about job retention, the career and the workforce of only 2 years, but then we're talking about students choosing an institution for 4 years, some even 6 years if they're doing a doctorate program or a master's program at that institution. And so it's not as easy for the student to just cut and run and say, after 2 years, I don't like this anymore. And then what do? They have to restart over again at a different institution. And so when we're talking about this transparency and the stakeholder voices, something I'm really grateful at my institution, I'm a junior politics student at Ithaca College, located in Ithaca, New York in the United States. And one of the great things about the institution is our Student Governance Council, where we have a board of elected students who are there to basically be a voice for students when it comes to talking to senior leadership team and people with power across our campus. And it's a really great opportunity to have these leaders from across campus come and sit down and meet the students where they are and listen to what the students are genuinely concerned about. Because the fact of the matter is, the provost or the president at any institution sitting in their office is not going to know what the issue is that the student is facing when they're down in the student union. That's just not how it's going to work. And that's just the truth, unfortunately. And then another thing too that Rita had touched on and thinking about experiences at university and how we carry them and the impact they have. Another thing about this antiquated model is that when well-rounded student is mentioned nowadays, or has been mentioned, it usually means someone who has dabbled in every subject area, someone who can do the natural sciences and the liberal sciences and everything in between. But that's not the well-rounded student anymore. The well-rounded student is the student showing up as their whole selves in their clubs, in their organizations, at their volunteer opportunities across campus. Because if students aren't learning these necessary skills of teamwork and team building and self-reliance and individuality outside of the classroom, I think that's a really large part of this disconnect that we're seeing when students leave academia and get into the workforce, you know? And students need to have the space to learn themselves in university. And that doesn't just mean what subject interests them. You can change your major 55 times if you have to figure out what you like. But that isn't necessarily what's going to add to the whole person, to everything that the student is. And that's what they're carrying with them into the workforce. I mean, yeah, I'm sure that they are carrying some of their class content, their course content that they've learned and ways of learning and ways of doing things. But ultimately that social interaction, that whole physiological being aspect of the student is what's going to carry them into the workforce. And that's where I think that the transparency of stakeholders between universities is super important, because then students need to be able to voice to their leadership what they expect from this institution. What do they expect from this institution that they're making this devoted commitment to, and how can they get the most for their money? Because frankly, the cost of higher education doesn't look like it's going down anytime soon. And that's not just the financial cost, that's the mental cost, the emotional cost, and everything in between. And I'm really glad that this conversation is happening. I think that this transparency between universities and stakeholders is something that has not been talked about enough yet. And I'm hopeful that, as terrible as this pandemic has been across the world, I hope for higher education that this is just the beginning of a longer conversation. Thank you.
Beautiful, Connor. And obviously the student consumer is the obvious key stakeholder who can provide grassroots insights on what's going on at the university based on their experience in real time, so that leadership can adjust and adapt. I want to share two examples of what Connor spoke about. Students approach me all the time. Two examples where the student was totally disempowered. One student approached me because she was stressed out taking a physics class. She shared with me that 60% of the students were failing. I said, okay, so what have you tried so far? She said, we started at the bottom and we have reached out to everybody up that chain, including the university's president, and we're told nothing could be done. That we were basically put your big girl pants on and muddle through it and figure it out. I suggested perhaps you could take that class over the summer somewhere else and transfer it in. Program does not allow that. Okay, so if 60% of the students are failing a course and the students have no outlet or no voice and can't make any changes, what are we doing here? Another student, one of the varsity baseball players, approached me during time to register for classes for next semester. Okay. He was stressed out, depression, on medication, asked me for some guidance on what he should do. He was majoring in sports management. And I said, JT, well, what's the problem? He goes, I have to take 3 accounting classes and 2 economics classes. And I said, for sports management, thought about it, and I said, oh, teaching opportunity. So I said, JD, I want you to look at some competitive programs locally and see how ours stacks up against it. So he did do that research and came back with me. The program that he was in was wildly different. So students need, through this Student Government Council, to be able to let leadership know what is going on at the grassroots, where we are not delivering, what problems we're encountering that we aren't able to overcome ourselves. And they need to be empowered through this Student Governance Council to be able to do something about it. So totally love that, Connor. And a lot of universities do not have that. Again, absolutely, unemphatically necessary. And in no other industry would this be allowed to happen, because the consumer would be publishing everything out on social media and the business would need to respond. I'm getting off the soapbox. Dr. Leslie.
Well, I find this conversation quite interesting. I think one of the things that is left out of this conversation is the stakeholders who are not students. So the faculty are a large stakeholder in this conversation, and also the administration. And I'm not completely convinced, in fact, I'm not convinced at all, that the interest of the administration and of the faculty are aligned with those of the students. I'm at a land-grant university, University of Florida, in Gainesville, Florida. And the aspiration of the university is to be in the top 10 of the public universities. I think we're, depending on who's doing the ranking, we might be in the top 10 of public universities. But here's the point. We are modeling ourselves in our aspiration after the elite universities in the country. Now, the elite universities, their job is to prepare a select group of people to take on roles in government, in industry, and perhaps in the public sector, and to actually make sure that they meet the elite standards, which the Harvards, the Princetons, and the Yales, and not the needs actually of what I would call the general population. When you mentioned the fact that 50% of the students are flunking out of a physics class, I think that's by design. There are not enough opportunities for people with, for example, with nuclear physics, for all of them to graduate and go into nuclear physics. The structure of the cohort, if you would, of people who are successful, they're products of elite universities. They're the ones that get to say who should, they're gatekeepers, if you would. So they're not interested in having everyone join them. They want a specific type of person that fits a specific type of profile to be able to join their ranks. So what I'm saying here is that we think, or we like to think, and I was one of those people. I've been in academia for over 40 years. So we'd like to think that we're serving the general population and the needs of students, when in fact we're not. We're not dedicated to that. I'm going to take this a step further. When you talk about, I think you mentioned it, Dr. Laura, and perhaps you touched on this also, Connor. Students have a set of interests that are not aligned with the interests of the faculty. You see, so that's why that conversation is very difficult to have. We're talking about, oh, we need to fill, we have to maintain the class, shall I put it this way? We have to have our required courses filled in our curriculum so that the faculty can teach those courses. And we also need to have a certain enrollment number so that the state legislature will grant us funding to continue to teach those courses. I mean, it's not designed to serve students. Now, I'm open to a conversation about how to shift that, and I'll conclude with this for the moment. I think that there's a conversation that we don't have about what the being of a university is, what the being of a faculty member is. The ethos of many institutions, the being of that institution, is not about the students. It's about the prestige of the university. It's about job security for the faculty. It's about job security for the administrators. It's about the politics of funding from, if you're in a state supported institution, from the legislature. And if you're in a private institution, it's the private donors who have a great say in what is going to be taught in those classes. So I think the fundamental question is, who are we being as a university? Who are we being as faculty? Who are we being as administrators? And is there a match, and I would suggest there's a mismatch between that being and the people that are now coming into the universities that have a very different outlook on what a university experience is supposed to be all about. So I'll stop there right there for the moment.
I love, Dr. Leslie, that you are talking about being, and I love that you are opening up the conversation to additional conversations, okay? Because that's important. Not everybody, not every student's going to fit Harvard or Yale or University of Penn, right? But we have tons of students to educate at all different levels, okay? And to ask me to believe that this is not possible in higher ed is ludicrous, okay? We're going to travel to the moon. We know there's probably 11, 12 time-space continuums. And Visa knows every time we sneeze, and they're never wrong, it is absolutely possible to deliver better value. And I think you're 100% right that it starts through conversations, right? Who are we being as a university for what type of student? And then how do we develop relationships with those students for who we are, right? So there's this relationship between the student and the university. It's, you know, it's a global issue, you know, and the world is flat now. So it's that important, not to mention the you know, competition. And of course, the pandemic just really, as Connor says, just skeletons are out of the closet now. Interestingly enough, you know, I'm going to contend that in no other industry would this be acceptable. Okay, take air flight. If you had a plane a day, 250 passenger plane a day crashing, the world would be up in arms and we would be required to do something about it. If a surgeon, heart surgeon say, success rate was 30 or 40%, he would no longer be doing heart surgery. So I think it's very important that these issues that we're talking about need visibility and quickly. Okay, so much important stuff. Go ahead.
Just to follow on to that, Dr. Laura, and it had something to do with what Bruce mentioned earlier. So you said, I think that we're all agreed that universities could better serve students. I mean, we're all agreed on that. The point is, what are the key performance indicators for a university? You know, at mine, it's publications, right? And publications in very abstruse journals, right?
Yes.
It's also whether or not the university is rated in some, and I guess we're coming back to the core of our conversation here, in US News and World Reports thinks that this is a good university for students to attend. I mean, and it could be any other rating organization that has the prestige or grants prestige to that university. Many of those ranking groups and organizations are students, and what students need are probably close to the bottom of the list on their ranking system, right? So I think that that's where, you know, the conversation, and I know that's why we're here today, that needs to be focused. What are the indicators that what should be used? And then how can we get university administrators and faculty members to align with that new set of indicators? Why would they want to adopt them? I mean,
I can't even believe you said that, Dr. Leslie, because we had a session yesterday on the impact of student voices. And I talked about the university ranking system because I've been investigating it. One popular university ranking system measures 9 broad areas. Here they are. 1, graduation and retention rates. We all know this ranking system. 2, graduation rate performance. 3, graduate indebtedness. 4, social mobility, which really means Pell graduation grant rates. Faculty resources, class size, faculty compensation, percent of faculty with terminal degree, percent of full-time faculty. Number 6, expert opinion, whatever that is. 7, financial resources. 8, student excellence, which means high school standing in the top 10 or 25%. And number 9, alumni giving. Now understand, these are important factors, but they don't paint a fair or accurate picture. And the university rankings are what parents and students, one of the tools that they go to which university is best for my child. And it does not include, go ahead, Rita, go ahead, jump in.
So I just wanted to add to that because this is actually really, really great conversation. So what I'm hearing now, this is a very US-centric conversation. So in the UK, it's slightly different. The measurements are different. In India, in Singapore, in the different countries, they're very, very different ranking systems. In the business school that I'm associated with, again, it's very different. It's about what are the salaries that your graduates get later on, and they're ranked that way. So you have different newspapers like the Financial Times, sort of different financial publications that rank on that. A conversation that is being had at this very moment across different business schools are, why are we only ranking by salaries later on? As an example, given that a lot of these people end up as entrepreneurs later on, they end up doing something else. And when you're an entrepreneur, you don't have a salary, you kind of start with nothing again. And a lot of it these days is about impact. What is the impact that students are having on the world? Universities now, at the end of it, we're a conduit. Universities are a conduit to help these students make their mark in the world, become that next generation change makers, and impact is very, very much part of that. And yet, there isn't not a single rating scale that exclusively looks at the impact in the world. It's all based upon the different factors that you've mentioned, Laura, some of what you've mentioned, Micah, but also the financial things as well. So it's about, what is that impact? You know, when you look at firms out there, you look at CSR, you know, corporate social responsibility, you look at ESG, you look at, you know, different facets of the United Nations development goals out there, and you talk about, you know, climate change, you know, gender equality, education for all, things like that, and yet these things aren't happening. So what is the impact that is going on? So I think, and I go back to talking about student clubs again, because that is one way that some of the students clubs, certainly in the institutions, again, out of the US that I deal with, can really, really feel their footing, because it's a holistic approach, as Connor mentioned. It's not just what happens in the classroom. It's not just what happens in exam. It's a holistic. There's a lot of focus on what happens just you know, in between closed doors or in a hybrid situation if folks are still doing that. But what is happening outside, that social interaction that students go through, what is happening outside campus, that is very much part of the formative experience that goes into the students. It's the same with faculty and staff as well. It's not just what happens there. A lot of people just think, oh, faculty, they're there to teach. Teaching is a tiny part of actually what happens. You know, you're marking, you build up curriculum, you're looking at all of these different sort of policies that are constantly being laid out, and you have to follow them. You're having students that are coming even from overseas. What are the different cultural nuances, the environmental restrictions you have to look at as well? So there's so much more involved as well in this process that I wanted to bring up, that it's not just a disconnect on, you know, what are we using to rate? I would even question the ratings themselves and what needs to be done there.
Thank you, Rita, for saying that, because the whole idea, Bruce, I just want to jump in here real quick. The whole idea of this summit is for global international cooperation so that we can do a better job for our global community. Bruce, go ahead.
I've had the very unique opportunity to travel widely and overseas as well. And I have to say that when we come out of these conferences, it's discovered that we're all talking primarily about the same things. Our system isn't broken. It was designed this way. We have legacy systems that were not designed for current student populations and real world demands. You know, you were talking about alumni outcomes, Rita, and impact, and I agree wholeheartedly that the rating systems themselves have to be questioned. Dr. Leslie, you were talking about how we hold, you know, again, faculty and leadership accountable, and how we, you know, have to think about what innovations are necessary in order to meet the demands of you know, our real world now, even as we're hopefully emerging from the pandemic. And I wholeheartedly agree with, would you go to a surgeon who only was 30 to 40% successful? Of course you would not. Now, but tradition, of course, allows for belonging. But I think what we need to do is make sure that what we do is we redefined that kind of belonging. We can maintain our most valued traditions, but we must allow for change, and we must allow for innovation.
I love that you said that, Bruce, because I am the poster child for higher ed. Honest to God, I am. Love it. You know, I love it. Loved my university experience from undergraduate through PhD. And, you know, I've spent my entire life as a student, as a professor, and most of the time as both. So we do value these traditions, but we really need to do a better job, and we need to share across the globe, understand. I teach a lot of international students, and they come with different skill sets, and I learned from them in the classroom. How did you figure that out so quick? Oh, this is how we learned it in India. Why can't we share across the globe? And this summit is providing an amazing opportunity for us to do that. Linda, I see another group right here that should be meeting on a regular basis to talk about these things and push this thinking and conversation out into the larger world so that some productive action can be taken. Connor.
Yeah, just hearing what's been said, what I am hearing, what's going through my mind is the numbers are not cutting it anymore. Numbers are not telling a holistic story for students. They are not telling a holistic story for the administration. Numbers do not mean anything at this point. If you ever notice, every time that college application time rolls around for a university, everybody wants to hear the stories of the current students to help bring new students there. And then as soon as the new students are there, the stories stop and it goes right back to the numbers. Stories are where we're bringing people here. The holistic approach are where we're bringing students to institutions. And that holistic approach is what needs to continue. And students as stakeholders, that importance doesn't end once they graduate. We're forgetting to mention the importance of the alumni stakeholders in all of this also. Like Dr. Leslie had mentioned, in a private institution, alumni are some of your greatest stakeholders financially when it comes to trying to make sure you have funding. And frankly, after serving on an alumni board as a student member, I have not found one alumni who was really concerned with the numbers. who was concerned with the same numbers that the US News and World Report or any other publication was worried about. The alumni is concerned about the student experience and the stories of the students and the holistic student experience. And so that is a hopeful indicator that we need to move toward that. It needs to be more holistic. The numbers are not cutting it anymore because the numbers are not telling the stories anymore. And the numbers are not what are impressing people anymore. Like Rita had mentioned with the Financial Times, salaries aren't telling you anything. You know, I could have been probably the worst student in the business school and I ended up getting a wonderful job somehow. My salary says that I'm doing great, but the entrepreneur who was top of his class, top of her class, isn't making as much as me. But when you hear our stories, you would say that that individual is probably more successful than I was. The holistic approach is what needs to be happening, and that transparency is hopefully going to open up a world into that holistic approach.
Beautiful, Connor. And that's back to you, Dr. Leslie. That is being wholeness, right?
Well, yes, Connor said something that, and I think Rita also said something about how we move to a, say, a non-quantitative assessment, or at least include non-quantitative factors in our assessment. But I've also had the privilege of teaching at various universities abroad, several in Africa. And, you know, one of the things that it stands out to me is that there is a concern for students wanting to be at a university that's going to guarantee them a higher salary. I mean, that's why they're going to the university. They want to improve the quality of their life financially, right? So many of them come from homes or situations in which, you know, they don't have those resources. I mean, contrary, as Rita said, you know, the American experience is not the world experience. But I want to engage this, if I could, with you, Rita, and perhaps Connor. You know, there is something to be said for the university providing you access to a higher standard of living. How do you demonstrate that to prospective students? And their parents are there, they're paying money to have their kids go to these places. And how do you get a university, for example, I'll give you a concrete example. I taught at the University of Zambia for 3 years and the University of Yaoundé in Cameroon for 2 years. And I would say, based on my experience there, that if you told students that they were not, that this university is not going to guarantee them a higher level of income, would be a non-starter, all right? And if you tell them that, oh, when you leave here, you're going to become an entrepreneur and have to start from zero again, that would be a non-starter conversation too. So I just want to understand how we get, and the university itself, let me add this third piece, the university administration and the faculty themselves are positioning themselves as this is a place where if you come here, you're going to become a high paid lawyer or you're going to become a high paid engineer. So I just want to understand how we make this saleable, this new set of KPIs to universities in many countries that are attempting to market themselves as a place where students are going to have access to a higher financial quality of life.
Well, that's actually great.
Go ahead, Rita.
Oh, no, because Dr. Leslie mentioned my name on that. So I just wanted to quickly add that. So I actually taught in Zambia as well to the girls of Kalinga in a school there. And one thing that I noticed, because I do a lot of work with women and in particular youth, is that above and beyond thinking about later on what they might earn to sustain and look after their families, it's that feeling of empowerment. What do they get out of it? What is that? How do they feel even empowered to go to get an education later on? So that was the first thing that I noticed, you know, depending on which part of the world. Some of the folks that I also speak to as well in rural areas in India as well, very, very similar. It's even the step before that. They're not looking to get an education to necessarily earn more later on. They're looking to get an education to be something, to discover, to get out of this sort of I can't do methodology or this sort of mode of thinking. So, and I found this to be really, really true. It's not just the girls, for everyone to find out, what am I going to do later on? Don't also forget that what we've talked about today, we're talking about some of the high flying careers. My dad wanted me to be a doctor. I actually studied medicine for a couple of years. I didn't become a doctor. I ended up as an entrepreneur, but I ended up being one in my own right. But that's the point. You know, you get musicians, you get historians, you get folks that end up being authors later on. Those aren't necessarily high flying, you know, high paid jobs straight away, but you're doing it to learn. You're doing it to educate yourself. You're doing it in education is much more than financial. Right? What is the purpose of education? To learn, to transfer the knowledge. If you are a good teacher, you're not trying to just, what you're trying to do is make the person, your student, better than you. You want to impart everything and then some. You want them to think and do something more than what you're doing. So it's not just that, and that's why I go back to impact. What is the impact you're having on society later on? Yes, depending on where you are in the world, there are certain folks that said, yes, we must go if there's prestige involved, but how do you define prestige? You know, I would also argue that prestige isn't just what you're earning later on. It's about what is the impact you're making on the world? What are you doing with your life? How are you helping other people? What are you doing later on? And universities as well have areas where they show that impact as well. I know as a student, I went to King's College London, but I could have gone to so many others. One of the factors that made me decide wasn't about, oh, will I earn more money? I had no clue that I was going to go into investment banking, no clue. When I started off, I was 16, I got educated in the UK. You don't get to major there and switch degrees. No, you're stuck with it at the age of 16. What you've chosen, you're going to study at the age of 18 and you're going to stick with it. You change your mind, you're going to wait another 2 years to start again from scratch. That's the reality of education outside the US in a lot of countries around the world. I wasn't thinking, what am I going to earn later on? Maybe my parents were, but maybe not. They wanted me to be a doctor. A doctor in the UK doesn't earn that much, you know. So for me, it was very much like I wanted to get holistic experience. What is the student experience? Where are my friends going as well? You know, what is the nightlife like? What are the clubs like? You know, as a student, you're thinking of much more than that. So that's what I would say in terms of sort of addressing part of your question. And that's what students, universities are thinking more and more of now. As an active alumna myself at several different academic facilities, I do the same thing. It's what's the student experience, as Connor mentioned, and helping. If people want to go into different career routes, how can we help them, knowing that people are probably going to change careers several times along the way.
Beautiful. That's very, very important. Who's chiming in here? Was that Bruce?
Was me. It's Connor.
Oh, Connor.
I just want to add on to that too. I think that goes back, Dr. Leslie, to the conversation surrounding prestige of the institution. If we're just choosing institutions based on prestige, if anyone's familiar with Ithaca, New York, Ithaca College is on one hill and Cornell University is on the other hill. And I've spoken to many Cornell University students who seem absolutely miserable, but they're there because of the prestige of the institution. And frankly, when it comes to worrying about salaries and things, I've talked to lots of different business owners and hiring managers regarding their hiring process. You can always teach individuals hard skills. You can teach individuals how to calculate in Microsoft Excel, and you can teach them how to understand how to invest in finance and do payroll. But you can't teach an individual how to understand themselves and how to have the emotional intelligence to be an enjoyable coworker in the workforce. And I think that that goes back to that gap that Dr. Laura and Bruce were mentioning earlier regarding academia and corporate. If you're just in it for the financial gain, which I don't blame anybody, I understand that we're in a world right now where finances are at the top of a lot of young people's minds, including myself. And frankly, I would rather be hired because I have a self-awareness and understanding of myself and a holistic approach to my work, rather than just because of the skills I can bring and then not have any really room for advancement or learning anymore. And when thinking about, choosing university, I was someone who didn't choose based off of financial skills. All the careers that have been on my mind have not been high in financial, but they've been high in what I believe would be beneficial to me as a whole individual. And I think that there has to be room, like Dr. Leslie mentioned, for both of those to be included in understanding what institution you're choosing. But ultimately, I guess the nut of what I'm trying to say is that I don't believe that the prestige of the institution, the prestige of the classes, the prestige of the faculty members and how many publications they have is what's going to lead to higher salaries for these individuals. I believe that having this holistic approach and this holistic experience and understanding themselves so that they're better able to know what they want and better able to know how they learn going into the workforce, I think that's what would lead to higher salaries rather than just having a degree from an Ivy League.
Good. Bruce?
I think maybe what we're looking at is enigmatology, puzzling, and the theories of puzzles. I mean, we've talked about how certainly we want a decent student experience. There is intrinsic value to an education. There's instrumental value to an education. We know, for instance, and I'm not certain that this applies worldwide, but the Gallup-Purdue survey, where a great majority of students are coming into higher education for to earn a credential and then to make a successful, sustainable life thereafter. But Connor, I absolutely echo what you're saying. A whole person is going to be a greater global citizen and a greater global contributor. So maybe what we're looking at is enigmatology here. We just need to put the puzzle together and then maybe longitudinally study that impact.
I love that, Bruce. We've all been, most of us here, through education, and some of us for long term, and we're taught how to figure these puzzles out. And what we need are passionate, smart people in a room and the power to figure this out. This has been an amazing session. I'm so honored to be associated with all of you on this call, and I hope we can keep in touch afterward. Let me know how I can help you.